Hey everyone, and welcome to Nighttime Stories. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. Now, get comfortable and relax. I never thought anything about hunting would shake me like this. My uncle had been taking me into the woods since I was a kid, teaching me how to sit still, how to listen, how to read the ground for signs of deer or turkey. We had gone out in the cold, in the rain, even in the dark before dawn, and none of that had ever really scared me. It was just the woods, familiar, predictable, quiet in a way that made you feel like the rest of the world did not matter for a while. That trip in Kentucky changed all of that. It started like any other. He had a cousin with land that stretched for miles, thick with trees and not a neighbor in sight. We drove up with rifles in the truck, a cooler of food, and the kind of excitement that comes from knowing you will not see another soul for days. The cabin we stayed in was bare bones, just enough to keep us dry and out of the wind. The roof leaked a little, and the wood stove smoked if you did not open the flue just right, but I always liked it. It felt like stepping back in time. That first evening, after we had set out some salt blocks and checked the tree stands, we sat on the porch with a couple of beers and watched the sun drop behind the ridgeline. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, sharp and clean. My uncle was telling a story about a buck he had missed when I noticed something strange. Off in the distance, deep in the trees, there was a glow. At first I thought it was just the last of the sunset catching through the branches, but as the sky went darker, the glow did not fade. It grew sharper, more defined, until I realized it was red. I nudged him and pointed. He squinted for a long time and finally muttered, "Hell is that?" From where we were, it looked like the outline of a cabin, not just a lantern in a window, not a campfire either. The whole shape of it glowed faintly, like the light was coming from inside and spilling out through every crack. It looked wrong. Too bright for a lantern, too steady for fire. My first thought was emergency lights, like maybe someone had gotten lost or hurt and set something up to be seen. But there were no roads back there, no trails even. It was all thick woods and ridges that you would have to bushwhack through. We sat there staring for longer than I realized, neither of us saying much. Finally, he shrugged like it was not our problem and went inside to stoke the stove. I tried to follow his lead, but even as I lay in my bunk later, the glow burned in my head. I felt like I could still see it when I closed my eyes, that strange, steady red in the middle of nowhere. The night air carried every little sound into the cabin. Normally it was just owls or the wind through the trees, but that night there was something else. At first it was faint enough that I thought I was imagining it. A low hum that seemed to rise and fall in rhythm. I told myself it was the wind moving strange, or some animal call I had not heard before. But the longer I listened, the more it sounded like voices. Many voices, moving together, chanting. I sat up in my bunk, straining to hear. My uncle was snoring in the other bed, completely out. I held my breath, waiting, and then I caught it again. Definitely voices, faint but steady, carrying through the trees, and underneath it, something else, a smell. The cabin had its own mix of scents, wood smoke, damp clothes, old pine boards, but this cut through it sharp and acrid, smoke, but not from our stove. It had a bitter chemical edge, the kind that stings the back of your throat. I sat there, heart beating too hard, staring at the dark window. I almost woke him, but I knew how that would go. He would laugh, call me jumpy, tell me to get back to sleep. So I lay back down, eyes open, every nerve in my body tight. The chanting drifted in and out, like a tide. Sometimes close enough to make out syllables I did not recognize, sometimes so faint it was gone. I do not think I slept at all. In the morning the glow was gone, just trees and ridges like always, nothing out of place. I almost convinced myself I had dreamed it, that I had worked myself up over nothing. But when I stepped outside, I could still smell it faintly in the air, that bitter smoke, and the birds were quieter than usual, the woods too still. My uncle walked out, yawning, scratching his beard, and I almost said something. I wanted to tell him about the voices, about the smoke, but I stopped myself. He would just brush it off, and I would sound like some spooked kid, so I swallowed it and followed him out to the stand like nothing was wrong. But the whole day, my eyes kept drifting back toward the trees where I had seen that glow. Every rustle of leaves, every shift of the wind, I found myself turning my head, half expecting to see it again. I told myself it was nothing. I tried to bury it, but that night, when the sky went dark, I felt the unease come back, crawling up my spine. I knew I would hear it again, and deep down, I knew it would be louder. The second night was worse. I could feel it pressing in even before the sun dropped below the ridge. The woods had that charged silence, the kind that makes you keep glancing over your shoulder even when you know there is nothing there. My uncle did not seem to notice. He went about things the same as always, checking his rifle, cooking up beans on the stove, talking about how he hoped we would see some movement in the morning. I nodded along, but my head was somewhere else. When it finally got dark, I could not stop myself from looking through the window, searching that stretch of trees where the glow had been. For a while it was just blackness. Then, like a match flaring in the distance, the red light appeared again, not faint, not fading like firelight, steady, unnatural. I froze, my spoon halfway to my mouth, and just stared. My uncle followed my gaze, grunted, and shook his head. "Probably some fool kids out there messing around," he said, though his voice did not carry much conviction. He turned back to his food and kept eating. I could not. I set the bowl down. My stomach knotted too tight to take another bite. The glow was stronger now, almost pulsing, though maybe that was just my eyes playing tricks. I stepped outside for some air, and the cold hit me like a slap. It was dead quiet. No crickets, no owls, just the sound of my breath clouding in front of me. And then the chanting started again. This time there was no mistaking it. It was closer, clearer, the rhythm unmistakable. Low voices, rising and falling together, strange syllables that made my skin crawl even though I could not understand a word. I stood there with my boots in the dirt, heart pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. The smell came next, stronger than the night before, bitter and heavy, like wet wood mixed with burning hair. I gagged and stumbled back inside, slamming the door behind me. My uncle looked up, surprised, but when I tried to explain, the words stuck. I must have sounded half-crazed, babbling about chanting and smoke. He put a hand up to calm me down, said we would check it out in the morning, that no one would be out there all night this deep in the woods. But the chanting did not stop. It wove through the trees, sometimes fading, sometimes swelling, until it felt like the voices were just beyond the walls of the cabin. My uncle tried to act like it was nothing, but I noticed he cleaned his rifle twice that night, his eyes flicking toward the window more than once. Lying in my bunk, I kept staring at the ceiling, listening. The voices rose and fell like a tide, and every time I started to drift toward sleep, they surged back stronger, pulling me awake. Around what must have been the middle of the night, my dog started whining, low and steady, ears flat against his head. I tried to soothe him, but he only got more agitated, pacing the floor, claws clicking on the wood. Then he stopped dead, staring at the door, a growl deep in his chest. The chanting stopped at that exact moment. The silence that followed was worse. It felt heavy, like the air itself was waiting. I held my breath, straining to hear anything at all. That was when I caught it. A faint crackle, like fire eating through dry wood, and then, far too close for comfort, a voice not in unison this time but alone, clear enough that I swear it spoke words in English. "We see you." I shot up in bed, every muscle in my body tensed. My uncle was awake now too, sitting upright, his hand on his rifle. His face was pale, the bravado gone. He had heard it too. We sat there, frozen, staring at the door, the smell of burning stronger than ever. Minutes dragged by, though it felt like hours. No more voices, no footsteps, no knock at the door. Just that smell and the heavy silence. Eventually, somehow, we both dozed off in the chairs by the stove, rifles across our laps. Morning brought a thin gray light and a frost that clung to the grass. For a few blissful seconds I thought maybe it had been a dream, the kind of thing that makes sense in the night but falls apart in daylight. But when I stepped outside, my stomach dropped. On the dirt just beyond the porch were marks. Not footprints exactly, but scuffed patches in the frost. Long streaks like something had been dragged. They formed a rough circle around the cabin, not random at all. My uncle crouched down, touched the ground, and swore under his breath. Neither of us said much after that. We ate in silence, packed our rifles, and headed out to hunt like we had planned. But my heart was not in it. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves made me jump. The woods no longer felt like the safe place I had known since childhood. It felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with deer or turkey. We stayed out until early afternoon, saw nothing, and trudged back. I could tell my uncle was rattled, though he tried to hide it. He walked faster than usual, kept scanning the trees, and when we got back to the cabin, he checked every window and door like he was making sure we were not being watched. That night, I begged him to let us leave early, but he refused. "One more day," he said firmly, though I caught the tightness in his voice. He was too proud to admit he was scared, but I knew he was. As the sky went dark, I felt my chest tighten again. I did not want to look, but I could not stop myself. Out through the trees, that same red glow flickered to life, stronger now, closer, and for the first time, I thought I saw movement in it. Shadows crossing in front of the light, shapes that did not look entirely human. I shut the curtain, sat back down by the stove, and tried not to breathe too loud. But the chanting was already starting up again. Louder, clearer, and this time, it did not sound like it was coming from far away. By the third night, neither of us were pretending anymore. My uncle tried to act like everything was fine, but I could see it in the way he paced the small cabin, the way he kept the rifle close even while stirring beans on the stove. The smell of smoke still hung faint in the air, even in daylight, and I swear, more than once that morning, I caught him staring into the trees as if expecting someone to step out at any second. We spent the day walking ridge lines, but neither of us said much. The forest felt wrong, too still. The usual calls of birds and the rustle of squirrels in the underbrush were gone. Our boots crunched on the frosted leaves, and each sound seemed too loud. I tried to start conversations, but they petered out fast. We were both listening, waiting. By late afternoon, when we headed back, I was exhausted from nerves alone. My legs ached, and the cold seemed sharper, biting through the layers of clothes. I wanted to pack up and leave. But when I suggested it again, he shook his head firmly, saying we would stay the night and leave at dawn. He was stubborn like that, but I also think he felt something he could not explain, the kind of pride that would not let him run from it. That evening, as the sky drained of light, the glow returned. I felt it before I saw it, a pressure building in my chest, an awareness that something was coming. When I finally looked through the window, there it was again. The red light bled through the trees, steady, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. I turned away, but my uncle was already pulling on his coat. "We are going to see it," he said, voice low and flat. Every part of me wanted to argue, but I followed. I think I was afraid of staying behind even more. We left the dog in the cabin, though he whined and scratched at the door, his nails scraping wood like he was desperate to stop us. My uncle muttered for me to keep quiet, and we stepped into the dark. The forest swallowed us fast. The beam of my flashlight cut across trunks and branches, but beyond that was nothing. The glow, though, was like a beacon, steady and impossible to mistake. Each step closer made my stomach knot tighter. The smell grew stronger, too, that acrid smoke mixing with something sweeter, like burning meat. We broke into a small clearing, and there it was. A cabin, larger than I expected, squatting in the center like it had been waiting. Every seam glowed red, light spilling out between the boards as though the whole thing was burning inside. But there were no flames licking skyward, no smoke rising, just that steady, pulsing glow. I wanted to stop right there, but my uncle pressed on, crouching low. We circled wide until we found a window, grime-streaked and cracked. He raised a finger for silence, then slowly, carefully, wiped a small clear patch with his sleeve. We both leaned close. Inside, the glow was even brighter. Candles lined the walls, dozens of them, dripping wax-down carved wooden shelves. Bones were scattered in piles along the floor, bleached white under the red light. Some were small, too small, and my throat tightened when I realized what that meant. Then movement. 6 or 7 figures stood around a pit in the center. Their bodies were covered in long robes, hoods pulled low, faces hidden. They swayed together, chanting in a rhythm that made the boards of the cabin seem to vibrate. Their voices were low, deep, carrying weight like a current you could feel in your bones. My stomach dropped when I saw what was in the pit. It was not just fire. Something wrapped in a tarp, large and heavy, had been dragged into the flames. The edges blackened, curled, then gave way, and something pale showed through, a shape that looked too much like a hand. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My uncle caught my arm, his grip iron tight. His face was gray in the glow, jaw clenched, eyes wide. For the first time in my life, I saw him afraid. We should have left then. We should have run. But something made us stay, frozen, staring through the glass like moths to the flame. Then one of the figures stopped moving. Slowly, deliberately, it lifted its head. Though the hood shadowed the face, I knew it was looking right at us. My uncle cursed under his breath and shoved me back, and the two of us scrambled away from the wall. The chanting stopped. Dead silence. I could feel it, the air shifting, like the moment before a storm breaks. We ran then, crashing through brush, branches tearing at our clothes. Behind us, I swear I heard footsteps, steady and in unison, like the whole group had turned toward us. We did not stop until the cabin was in sight again, our own cabin, dark and still against the trees. We stumbled inside, slammed the door, and locked it. My uncle leaned against the wall, gasping, sweat dripping down his temple despite the cold. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The only sound was the dog whining, pacing in circles, barking at the door. I finally asked what he had seen. He shook his head once, slow, and said nothing. Just loaded his rifle again, his hands shaking enough that the bullets rattled against the wood table. That night, the chanting came again, louder, this time, closer, and for the first time, I thought I could make out the words. Not English, not anything I had ever heard before, but words all the same, syllables that pressed hard against my ears until I wanted to cover them. I lay there, rifle on my chest, eyes open to the dark, every nerve stretched thin. The dog would not stop growling, low and steady, his hackles raised, staring at the door. And just before dawn, when I thought I could not take another minute, the chanting stopped. But in the silence that followed, I heard something worse. Breathing, slow, steady breathing. And it was coming from just outside the window. When the sun finally bled through the curtains, I half expected to find the window shattered and the floor scattered with footprints. But there was nothing. Just the pale gray light of dawn and the smell of cold earth seeping in from the cracks in the walls. My uncle looked like he had not slept at all. His eyes were sunken, rimmed red, and his shoulders slumped like the weight of the night had pressed him flat. We did not speak as we cooked breakfast. Even the dog was quieter, though he stayed close, circling us nervously, ears pricked to every sound. The silence in the forest outside felt heavier than ever. No birds, no wind, not even the creak of trees shifting. It was like the woods were holding their breath. I wanted to leave that morning. Every bone in my body screamed to pack up and head back to the truck, no matter how long the hike. But my uncle insisted on staying, and I could see it was not stubbornness this time. It was something deeper, a kind of dread that if we left too soon, we might not make it out. He kept muttering under his breath that we needed to wait for the right time, though he never explained what that meant. By afternoon, I was restless. I walked the edge of the clearing around the cabin, looking for any sign of what we had heard. At first, it was just frost and leaves, but then I saw them again. Marks in the dirt, too deliberate to be random. Not footprints, not quite, but patterns scraped into the earth, curved lines and jagged angles, the same kind of shapes we had seen carved inside the barn. I crouched down, tracing one with my finger. The dirt was loose, freshly disturbed. I looked up and realized they circled the cabin again, only this time the marks were closer, pressed right up against the walls. When I went back inside and told my uncle, he only nodded grimly. He already knew. That night we lit no lanterns. We sat in the dark, rifles ready, every nerve stretched tight. The dog whined at the door until my uncle hushed him with a hand on his collar. Time crawled, and I kept glancing at my watch, even though the ticking made me sick with anticipation. Around the time the sky outside turned black, the glow appeared again. It was closer now. No longer a faint smear in the distance, but a steady pulse that spilled through the trees, painting the trunks in bloody light. My uncle shifted in his chair, jaw clenched, and I knew we were both thinking the same thing. Whatever this was, it was moving toward us. The chanting began again soon after. Louder this time, deep voices that seemed to crawl through the walls themselves. The dog growled low, pressed flat to the floorboards, ears pinned back. The sound grew and grew until it was impossible to tell where it was coming from. It was everywhere, filling the room, vibrating in my chest. Then something new, a knock. 3 sharp raps on the door, so loud it echoed through the cabin. My blood went cold. My uncle raised his rifle, eyes locked on the door. Neither of us moved. The knocking came again, harder this time, rattling the wood on its hinges. Then a voice, clear and deep, speaking words I did not understand. The syllables stretched and twisted, not quite human, and yet something in them scraped at the back of my mind, like I should have known them all along. I could not breathe. My chest tightened, and for a moment I thought I might faint. My uncle whispered sharply, telling me not to answer, not to move. I clutched my rifle, knuckles white, trying to still the trembling in my hands. The voice stopped. Silence pressed in, heavier than ever. Then, slowly, I heard footsteps moving around the cabin. One pair at first, then another, then more, circling, deliberate. The boards above our heads creaked as if someone had climbed onto the roof. My uncle and I sat back to back in the center of the room, aiming upward and outward, waiting for whatever would come. Glass shattered suddenly, the small kitchen window breaking inward. I spun, heart in my throat, but there was nothing there, just shards on the floor and the cold night air spilling in. Then, almost immediately, a crash from the other side, another window gone. The dog barked furiously, lunging against his collar, and in that moment I thought the whole cabin would come apart. My uncle shouted, and I shouted too, though I barely heard my own voice over the noise. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. No more chanting, no more footsteps, no more knocking, just silence. The red glow outside flickered once, twice, then dimmed to nothing, leaving the forest black again. I sat frozen, rifle still raised, unable to trust what my eyes were telling me. My uncle lowered his weapon slowly, breathing hard through his teeth. We stayed awake until dawn, waiting for the next sound, but none came. When the sun rose, the forest looked ordinary again. Frost on the ground, bare branches reaching into a pale sky, the kind of morning I had seen 100 times before. But the windows were still shattered, glass scattered across the floor, and outside, the marks in the dirt were fresh again, deeper, carved with more force. They covered the ground in front of every door and window, curling into symbols I could not begin to understand. My uncle did not even try to explain. He only said we would not spend another night there. We packed quickly, barely speaking, and I felt a strange relief when the cabin disappeared behind us through the trees. Still, as we hiked back toward the truck, I could not shake the feeling that the forest was watching. The silence clung too thick, and sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I thought I saw movement. A flicker of red, a shift of shadow, always gone when I turned my head. And though we were walking away, though the cabin was miles behind us, I could still hear it. That slow, deliberate knock, echoing in my skull. Leaving the forest should have been a relief. I kept telling myself we were almost out, that every step was bringing us closer to the road, closer to my uncle's truck, closer to something normal. But the deeper we went, the worse it felt. The silence in the woods pressed in harder with every mile. My boots crunched leaves. My uncle's rifle knocked softly against his shoulder with each step, and those were the only sounds. No birds, no wind, not even the faintest hum of insects. It was like we were walking through a dead world. We stopped once to rest, and I sat on a fallen log, wiping sweat off my forehead. My uncle stood the whole time, scanning the trees, his finger tapping against the stock of his rifle like he was trying to bleed off nervous energy. When I asked if he thought we were being followed, he did not answer. He only said we needed to keep moving, and his voice cracked slightly in a way I had never heard from him before. By late afternoon, the light began to change. The trees thinned, the air grew sharper, and I thought I saw a strip of road through the branches. For the first time in 2 days, my chest loosened. I wanted to run the rest of the way, to break free of the trees and leave the red glow behind us forever. But then the smell hit. That same acrid smoke, mixed with the sickly sweet stench of burnt meat. It came strong and sudden, like stepping into an invisible wall. My uncle froze. I froze too. Neither of us said a word, but both of us turned our heads in the same direction. Through the trees, the glow was back. Not faint, not distant, but close. So close, it painted the bark around us in streaks of red. My uncle swore under his breath, gripping the rifle tight, and pulled me toward the road. We half ran, half stumbled, branches slapping our faces, roots catching our boots. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The glow did not fade behind us. If anything, it seemed to follow, sliding through the trees, always just behind. We burst out onto the dirt road at last, gasping for breath. The truck was there, exactly where we had left it. Relief nearly buckled my knees. I thought we were saved. But when we got close, we saw the hood. Symbols had been carved deep into the metal, lines and curves gouged so sharp the paint had peeled away. They were the same symbols we had seen inside the barn, the same ones scratched into the ground around the cabin. The marks caught the last of the evening light, raw and jagged, and my stomach turned cold. "Get in," my uncle barked. His voice was tight, panicked in a way that rattled me more than anything else. We piled into the cab. He jammed the key into the ignition, but the engine coughed once, twice, and died. He tried again. Nothing. The smell of smoke grew stronger, seeping through the vents. I looked out the passenger window and nearly screamed. Figures were gathering at the tree line. Hooded shapes, 6 or 7 of them, standing perfectly still, their faces hidden. They did not move, did not chant. They only watched. My uncle cursed and slammed his fist against the wheel. He told me to hold on, then twisted the key again. The engine roared to life this time, sputtering but running. He slammed it into gear, and the truck lurched forward, tires spitting gravel. The figures did not move to stop us. They only stood there, watching, the glow pulsing behind them until the trees swallowed them from view. We drove in silence for a long time. The road twisted and turned, the forest falling away on either side, until finally, lights appeared ahead. A gas station, bright and humming, a piece of the real world I thought I might never see again. We pulled in and parked, both of us breathing hard, sweat soaking through our shirts despite the cold night air. I stepped out, legs shaking, and leaned against the hood, staring at the gouged symbols in the metal. In the bright fluorescent light, they looked even worse. Raw, violent. My uncle lit a cigarette with trembling hands, something he had not done in years. He smoked in silence, staring off down the road, like he expected the glow to roll up out of the darkness at any second. I went inside the station, desperate for something normal, even just the hum of freezers and the smell of burnt coffee. The clerk barely glanced at me, scrolling on his phone, and for a moment I thought maybe we had left it all behind. Maybe it was done. But when I stepped into the bathroom, I froze. The mirror above the sink was smeared with something dark, streaks drawn into shapes I recognized immediately. The same curves and jagged lines, the same symbols. My stomach dropped, and I stumbled back, nearly knocking over the trash bin. I told myself it had to be coincidence, some punk with a marker, anything else. But deep down, I knew. The symbols were following us. When I got back outside, my uncle was already in the truck, engine running, eyes wild. He told me to get in, now, and I did not argue. We drove all night, barely speaking, the road stretching ahead like it would never end. At some point, I must have drifted off, because when I woke, the sun was up, and we were pulling into his driveway. For the first time, I thought maybe we were safe. Until I saw the porch. On the wooden boards, carved deep into the grain, were the same symbols. Fresh, sharp, curling across the steps like they had been waiting for us. I wish I could tell you that walking into my uncle's house that morning felt like safety. That after everything we had seen, stepping into four walls that were ours, into a space we could lock and control, meant it was over. But the truth is, the moment I saw those symbols carved into his porch, I knew the line had been crossed. It was not just in the woods anymore. It was with us. We stood there for a long time, neither of us speaking. The dog whined softly, circling at our feet, tail pressed tight between his legs. My uncle's face had gone pale, his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. He finally muttered something I could barely hear, more to himself than to me. We should not have watched. We should never have looked. Inside, the air felt wrong. I cannot explain it better than that. The curtains were drawn, the morning sun spilling through in fractured beams, but the house seemed darker somehow, heavier. Every sound was too sharp, the tick of the clock on the wall, the creak of the floorboards under our boots, the shallow rasp of our breathing. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at my shaking hands, while my uncle paced the length of the room, smoking one cigarette after another. At some point, I do not know when, I fell asleep in the chair. When I woke, it was dusk. My uncle was gone. His rifle leaned against the wall, his jacket still hanging on the hook. The dog sat in the doorway, ears pricked, watching the porch with unblinking eyes. My chest tightened with a cold, sinking dread. I stepped outside, calling his name, but the only sound that came back was the low hiss of the wind through the trees. That was when I saw it. Another carving in the wood, fresh, so sharp the edges still splintered. A single symbol, larger than the rest, curling across the step like it had been waiting for me. The sound of chanting rose again, faint but unmistakable. My stomach twisted. It was coming from the woods, drifting through the trees, that same low drone of voices in unison. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, that exhaustion and fear were playing tricks on me. But then the glow returned. Not faint this time, not distant. The red light burned strong, spilling between the trunks, pulsing like a heartbeat. I stumbled back into the house, slamming the door shut. but the glow bled in through the cracks, painting the walls in streaks of blood red. The dog growled low, pressing against my leg, his body trembling. The chanting grew louder, closer. I backed away from the door, tripping over a chair, landing hard on the floor. From where I lay, I could see through the window. Figures, half a dozen at least, standing just beyond the porch, hoods drawn, faces hidden. They did not move, they did not speak. But the chanting continued, echoing from everywhere at once, vibrating through the floorboards, crawling into my chest. Then one of them lifted something, a lantern maybe, though the light it gave off was wrong. Not fire, not anything I could name. The glow pulsed brighter, and for a moment the figures seemed to blur, their shapes twisting, elongating, bending in ways that made my stomach turn. I blinked, and they were solid again. The dog barked once, sharp and desperate, before retreating under the table. I scrambled to my feet, fumbling for the rifle. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold it steady. I pointed it at the door, heart slamming in my chest, breath coming in ragged gasps. Who? The chanting stopped. Silence, heavy, crushing, then 3 knocks. Sharp, deliberate, the same rhythm we had heard at the cabin. I froze, the rifle still aimed at the door, sweat dripping down my face. My legs trembled so badly I thought they might give out. The dog whimpered. And then, nothing. No more chanting, no more glow, no more figures, just the dark, empty woods outside. I do not remember falling asleep, but at some point I woke in the chair again. Morning light filtered through the curtains, and the forest looked ordinary. The porch was bare, no figures, no glow. Only the symbols remained, carved deep into the wood. My uncle never came back. The police told me he had probably wandered off in the night. Hunters sometimes did that, they said, disoriented, lost in the dark. They searched the woods for days but found nothing, not a jacket, not a boot, not even a footprint. I did not tell them about the chanting. I did not tell them about the glow, or the hooded figures, or the symbols carved into the porch. I knew they would never believe me. I left the next week, packed my things, drove across state lines, found a small apartment in a city where the trees do not crowd so close. I told myself I was done with it, that leaving meant it could not follow me. But some nights, around the same time the chanting used to start, I wake up and smell smoke, acrid, sharp, mixed with something sweet and rotten. The dog growls at the door, his fur standing on end. And once, when I looked through the window, I thought I saw it. A faint red glow, far away, but closer than it should have been. I tell myself it is just in my head, that fear can linger long after the danger is gone, but I cannot shake the feeling that whatever we saw that night, whatever we stumbled into, is not finished with me. I do not go camping anymore. I do not hike. I do not wander back roads. I do not chase the quiet of the woods, because I know what waits there when the sun goes down. And I know, one night, it will find me again. I moved into this flat share in central Manchester about a month ago. The place was old, with creaky floors and drafts that snuck in through cracks around the windows. Nothing unusual for a building this age, but it had character and was in a decent part of the city, so I took it. The flat is shared with a couple of other people who mostly keep to themselves, which suited me fine. I'm not really a social butterfly, especially after long days at work. At first, everything seemed normal enough. I unpacked my stuff, set up my little corner of the room, and settled in with my cat, Momo. He's an old tabby with a bit of an attitude, but he's been my companion for years. The first few nights were quiet, just the usual city noises filtering through the window and the hum of the radiator. Then, about a week in, I noticed Momo started acting strangely at night. He would suddenly freeze, his ears twitching, and he'd hiss at the wardrobe in my room. At first, I thought it was just him being jumpy or maybe reacting to some noise I couldn't hear. Cats are weird like that sometimes, but it happened every night, like clockwork. Momo would glare at the wardrobe, fur bristling, and hiss until I turned on the light or distracted him. One night, curious and a little annoyed, I decided to open the wardrobe door to see what might be upsetting him. The moment I pulled it open, a gust of freezing air blasted out, so cold it made my skin crawl. The door slammed shut behind me with a bang that echoed through the flat. I stood there, heart racing, half expecting to see something lurking in the dark space inside the wardrobe, but it was empty, just my clothes and a few boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. Momo jumped back, staring at the open wardrobe with wide eyes, his tail puffed up like a bottle brush. He didn't want to go near it, and neither did I. I slammed the door shut quickly, the cold air swirling around my ankles. The radiator didn't seem to be enough to warm the room anymore, and a chill settled deep in the corners of the flat. After that night, Momo's behavior only got worse. He would paw at the wardrobe door, scratch at it, and hiss louder if I tried to get him away. Sometimes I'd hear soft noises coming from behind the door, like whispers or faint breathing. But every time I opened it, there was nothing there, just darkness and cold. The weirdest part started a few nights later. I was lying in bed when I suddenly heard the sound of slow, deliberate breathing coming from the wardrobe. It was deep and steady, like someone was just on the other side of the door, watching and waiting. My heart nearly stopped. I froze, listening to the inhales and exhales, trying to convince myself it was the flat settling or a draft sneaking in from somewhere else. But the breathing continued, rhythmic and unnerving. I wanted to open the door again, to confront whatever was there, but my hands shook too much to move. Momo was pressed against my leg, also stiff with fear. After what felt like an eternity, the breathing stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. I sat up, trying to shake off the dread that was creeping in. The wardrobe door was closed tight, no sign of movement or disturbance. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was in there, or had been, and that it was watching me. I started checking the flat for any obvious sources of drafts or gaps where cold air could be coming from. The windows were sealed, the door frames tight, and the radiator was working fine. There was no way the cold gust could have come from outside so suddenly, and the slow breathing definitely wasn't natural. I even asked my flatmates if they noticed anything strange, but they just laughed it off or said I was imagining things. Some nights when I turned the lights off and lay in bed, I swear I hear the breathing again, slow, steady, and deliberate. It makes me feel like I'm not alone, like the dark space behind the wardrobe is hiding something or someone that doesn't want me to look. I don't know if it's just a draft, some flatmate playing a prank, or something else entirely. But every night, as the cold air seeps out when I open that wardrobe door, I feel a chill that has nothing to do with the weather. And every night, Momo hisses at the shadows, warning me to stay away. After that first night with the cold gust and the slow breathing coming from the wardrobe, I couldn't just ignore what was happening anymore. Momo's behavior made it impossible to pretend nothing was wrong. I found myself sitting on my bed for long stretches, staring at that closed door, half expecting it to move on its own. Every little noise in the flat felt amplified, the creaks and groans of the old building no longer just the background soundtrack of city living, but something more ominous, something that made me want to double-check every lock and window. I tried to explain it all away, old house settling, a trick of the wind through the walls, maybe even my own imagination running wild after a long day at work. But it was hard to reason with the cold that rushed out when I opened the wardrobe, the way the air hit my face like a winter's blast even in the middle of summer. And that breathing, deep, slow, and deliberate, it was too steady to be anything like a draft. It was like someone was there, just behind the door, watching me. One night, after hearing the breathing again, I decided to do something I normally wouldn't. I grabbed my phone and recorded the sound. I sat on the bed, phone close to the wardrobe, and waited. The breathing started softly, just as I remembered, steady and unnerving. I recorded for a few minutes before the sound stopped. I played it back, the slow inhales and exhales coming through clearly. It was enough to make my skin crawl. I showed the recording to my flatmates the next day, hoping for some kind of explanation, or at least a shared sense of concern. They listened with raised eyebrows, and one of them joked about ghosts or paranormal activity, but they mostly brushed it off as some weird coincidence. I didn't blame them. It all sounded crazy even to me. But they agreed to keep an eye or ear out for anything strange during their own nights at the flat. Still, nothing changed. Momo continued his nightly vigil at the wardrobe, hissing and pacing. I tried distracting him with toys, treats, and even moving his bed to different parts of the room, but nothing helped. His unease was clear, and that only made me more anxious. It felt like he knew something I didn't, something that lurked just beyond the wooden door. I started researching the building, trying to find out if anyone had reported anything unusual in the past. The flat was part of a converted old townhouse, built in the late 19th century. I found mentions of former tenants, some of whom had lived there decades ago, but nothing explicitly about paranormal events or strange occurrences. Still, there were hints of people complaining about cold spots and odd noises in the building, but nothing concrete. One evening, I was sitting in the living room when I heard a faint scratching coming from the wardrobe. At first, I thought it was Momo batting at something, but the sound was too low and rhythmic, almost like tapping. I stood up and cautiously approached the door, my heart hammering. The room grew colder with every step. When I opened the door just a crack, a blast of icy air rushed out, and the door slammed shut behind me. I jumped back, startled, and stared at the closed door. The scratching sound had stopped. Momo was behind me, furiously trying to get under the bed, tail fluffed up like a brush. I didn't blame him. I wanted to run too. After that night, I couldn't sleep in my room alone. I started staying up later, sometimes sitting in the living room with the door locked, waiting for dawn. I even took to sleeping with the door slightly ajar, but with a chair wedged in front of it to keep it closed. Every little sound felt magnified: the creak of a floorboard, the rustle of fabric, the faint hum of the radiator. I was hyper-aware of the wardrobe, half expecting it to spring open or to hear that breathing again. I decided to bring in someone who might help, an old friend who knew a bit about the paranormal. She was skeptical at first, but agreed to spend a night with me at the flat. We set up recording devices around the room, placed candles near the wardrobe, and tried to create a calm, protective atmosphere. She joked about not expecting any ghostly guests, but was serious about documenting anything unusual. That night, as we sat quietly, I heard it again, the slow, deliberate breathing coming from the wardrobe. My friend's face went pale, and she whispered that it was definitely not a normal sound. We waited, barely breathing ourselves, until the breathing faded. Then, something shifted in the room. The temperature dropped sharply, and the candle flames flickered wildly as if caught in an unseen breeze. I felt a presence then, something watching us. I wanted to look away, to deny what my senses were telling me, but I couldn't. I forced myself to keep my eyes on the wardrobe door, heart racing. It felt like the air around it was thickening, heavy with something unspoken. The next morning, my friend helped me search for any hidden gaps or drafts that might explain the cold air and noises. We found none. The wardrobe was old but solid, with no cracks or holes big enough to let in significant airflow. It was sealed tight. Whatever was causing this was not natural. That experience shook me, but it also sparked a strange kind of curiosity. I wanted to understand what was in the wardrobe, if it was a spirit, a person, or something else entirely. I knew I couldn't keep ignoring the signs, the cold breath, the sounds, and Momo's warnings. From that night on, I made a habit of talking to whatever was behind the door. I spoke softly, telling it I meant no harm, asking what it wanted. Sometimes, I imagined hearing a soft sigh in response, or feeling a shift in the room's energy. I wasn't sure if it was real, or my mind filling in the gaps, but it gave me a sliver of peace. The wardrobe remained closed, but it was no longer just a piece of furniture. It was a doorway to something unknown, something that had found its way into my life and refused to let go. And I, for better or worse, was paying attention. Night after night, the breathing continued. It was a slow, deliberate rhythm, unmistakable and chilling in the stillness of my flat. I would lie awake, trying to convince myself that it was nothing more than the creaks of an old building or the wind playing tricks through the cracks. But the sound was too steady, too consistent to be anything ordinary. It came like a quiet warning from beyond the wardrobe door, reminding me that the space was not empty. I started paying closer attention to the subtle changes in the room. The air near the wardrobe felt colder, denser. My breath would fog in the small space between me and the door, even when the rest of the flat was warm. Momo, my cat, was constantly on edge. He refused to sleep anywhere near the wardrobe and would hiss or growl softly if I got too close. His instincts were sharp, and I trusted his reactions more than I trusted my own. It was as if he sensed something I could not see. One night, I noticed something new. The wardrobe door, usually shut tight, was slightly ajar when I returned to my room after a break. I was certain I had closed it before leaving. The cold air that rushed out made my skin prickle. I didn't want to open it, but the urge to understand what was happening was stronger. Slowly, I pulled the door open, half expecting a blast of icy wind or some dark shape lurking inside. But the space was empty, just my clothes and boxes stacked awkwardly in the shadows. Still, the sense of presence was overwhelming. The breathing resumed almost immediately after I shut the door, filling the room with its steady cadence. I felt trapped between fear and fascination. I wanted to know what was inside the wardrobe, but I was also terrified of what I might find. I decided to do some research about the building and its past. The flat was part of an old townhouse, converted into multiple flats decades ago. I searched through public records and found a list of former tenants. There was a name that caught my eye, an elderly man who had lived in the flat for several years before moving out abruptly in the early 1990s. The records mentioned no reason for his sudden departure, but neighbors recalled hearing strange noises from his flat and seeing unexplained lights flickering through the windows late at night. I tried to find more information about this man, but details were scarce. It was as if he had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and rumors. Some neighbors believed he had been involved in occult practices or had a troubled mind. Others thought he might have been hiding something dark within the flat's walls. Whatever the truth, his story added a new layer of mystery to the breathing behind the wardrobe. That night, I brought a small recorder into my room and placed it near the wardrobe door. I wanted to capture the breathing, to have some proof of what was happening. The sound was faint, but unmistakable on the playback. Deep, slow, and rhythmic, like the steady inhalations of someone holding their breath, or perhaps trying to stay hidden. It wasn't human enough to be comfortable, but it wasn't mechanical or random either. I shared the recording with a friend who was interested in paranormal phenomena. She suggested it might be a spirit trapped in the flat, possibly the previous tenant or someone connected to him. She explained that such presences often cling to physical spaces, especially when there are unresolved emotions or unfinished business. The wardrobe, being a closed, confined space, might be the perfect place for such an entity to linger. Her words made sense, but didn't ease my growing anxiety. The idea of a trapped spirit hiding behind the wardrobe was terrifying, yet I felt compelled to learn more. I started leaving small offerings near the wardrobe door, a candle, a piece of cloth, even a small note asking for peace. Sometimes the items would be moved or slightly disturbed the next day. Other times they remained untouched. It felt like a silent dialogue, a fragile bridge between my world and whatever was inside. I also experimented with different ways to communicate. I would knock gently on the wardrobe door, mimicking the slow rhythm of the breathing. Sometimes I whispered, asking if the presence was real, if it wanted me to help. Most of the time, there was no response other than the quiet hum of the flat. But once, after a series of knocks, I heard a faint reply, a soft tap, almost like a hesitant acknowledgement. My heart leapt, and I realized this was no longer just a story of fear, but one of connection. Despite the growing tension, life in the flat continued. My flatmates remained oblivious or uninterested in the strange occurrences. They chalked up my experiences to stress or overactive imagination. I couldn't blame them. It sounded unbelievable even to me. I found solace only in Momo, who stayed close by, watching the wardrobe with wary eyes. I knew I couldn't live like this forever, trapped by a presence I barely understood. I researched ways to cleanse or appease spirits, looking for methods that felt respectful and safe. I read about rituals involving sage, salt, and gentle prayers, but I also worried about provoking something that might be better left alone. One evening, I sat on the edge of my bed, the room bathed in soft candlelight. The wardrobe door was closed, but I could hear the familiar breathing inside. I spoke softly, telling the presence that I wanted to help, that it didn't need to hide anymore. I promised to listen, to respect its story. The breathing slowed, then stopped, leaving a heavy silence. I held my breath, waiting. After a few moments, a chill brushed against my skin, and I felt a sudden warmth flood the room, like a sigh of relief. It was as if the presence had accepted my offer, willing to reveal itself in time. From then on, the breathing became less frequent. Momo stopped hissing and started curling up near the wardrobe. His calmness, a reassurance I desperately needed. I still kept the candle burning at night, a small beacon of light and peace in the dark. I don't know what was inside that wardrobe, whether it was a spirit, a memory, or something else entirely, but I do know it wanted to be seen and heard. And in the quiet moments when the breathing fades and the flat grows still, I feel a presence that is no longer hidden, a presence that has found a fragile peace. The nights after that moment of seeming peace were different, but not quite normal. The breathing from the wardrobe became less frequent, and Momo stopped his restless pacing near the door, choosing instead to settle nearby with his fur less bristled, his eyes less wild. It felt like a small victory, like a silent truce between whatever was inside the wardrobe and me. Yet the flat still held its own kind of quiet tension, a feeling that the house itself was still alive with secrets and memories, just waiting for the right moment to stir again. I found myself more aware of the little things, the way shadows fell differently across the walls, the soft creaks in the floorboards that seemed almost like footsteps, the sudden cold drafts that didn't come from any open window or vent. It was like the house was still breathing, still watching, reminding me that some stories don't simply end with peace, but continue quietly beneath the surface. I couldn't help but wonder what the entity was thinking, feeling, or even hoping for. One particularly cold night, I heard the breathing again. It was softer this time, almost hesitant, like the presence was testing the waters, seeing if it was safe to be heard. I sat up in bed and gently spoke to the wardrobe, telling it I was here and listening, that it didn't have to be afraid. The slow, steady breaths continued, and for a moment I imagined a presence just beyond the thin door, waiting, watching, and maybe even hoping for a connection. Over the next few days, I made a habit of talking to the wardrobe at night, sharing small pieces of my day, thoughts, and worries. It became a strange sort of companionship, a quiet exchange between two lonely presences in an old flat that had seen more lives and stories than I could count. Sometimes the breathing would answer, steady and calm, and other times there would be nothing but silence. Still, I found comfort in the routine, in the shared moments of quiet and understanding. I also started researching more about the history of the building and the area. I wanted to know what memories the walls might be holding, what stories had unfolded within these rooms over the decades. The flat was part of a long-standing neighborhood in central Manchester, an area that had seen many changes but still held remnants of its industrial past. I found references to families who had lived and worked here, tales of hardship, joy, and loss, woven into the fabric of the city. One story caught my attention, a young woman who had lived in the flat during the early 1980s. She had been a writer, known for her melancholy poems and stories about the human condition. Neighbors remembered her as quiet and reclusive, someone who spent long hours in her room, writing by candlelight. There were rumors that she struggled with depression and isolation, and she had disappeared suddenly without explanation. The flat had been empty for a time before being rented out again. This story resonated with me. I wondered if the breathing behind the wardrobe was somehow connected to this woman, a lingering presence left behind by a life cut short or a soul seeking closure. The thought made the flat feel less like a haunted place and more like a home that held onto its residents, even after they were gone. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home feeling drained and anxious. The flat felt colder than usual, and the atmosphere was thick with an uneasy energy. I sat in the living room, trying to distract myself with music and television, but the silence of my own room called to me. Eventually, I made my way back to bed, and as I lay down, I heard the breathing start again. This time, it was accompanied by a faint whisper, almost like a sigh or a soft word spoken just beyond comprehension. I strained to listen but couldn't make out what was said. The sound was gentle and sad, filled with longing. I reached out, placing my hand gently on the wardrobe door, as if to offer comfort. The moment my palm touched the wood, a sudden warmth spread through my fingers and up my arm, like a small pulse of life connecting me to the other side. I gasped softly, pulling my hand back, but the sensation lingered, a reminder that I was not alone, that the presence wanted to be felt, to be acknowledged. From that night onward, the interactions grew more vivid. I would find small changes in the room, a book slightly out of place, a piece of clothing draped over a chair that I hadn't left there, or the faint scent of lavender wafting through the air. These subtle signs felt like messages, small acts of communication from a presence that had found a way to reach out. Momo, too, seemed calmer and more comfortable. He would sometimes sit near the wardrobe, watching quietly without the fear or aggression that had marked his earlier behavior. It was as if he, too, recognized the change and accepted the presence as part of our shared space. I started keeping a journal, documenting the nights, the sounds, and the small signs that appeared. Writing became a way to process the experience, to hold on to the fragile connection I had formed. I wrote letters to the presence, words of kindness and understanding, hoping that somehow they would reach beyond the door. The flat, once a place of mystery and fear, had become a space of quiet companionship. The wardrobe, once a source of dread, was now a doorway to connection, to stories untold, and to a presence that lingered not out of malice but out of need. And though the breath still comes softly on some nights, it no longer frightens me. Instead, it reminds me that some souls never truly leave, that memory and presence can live on in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes all it takes is a little kindness and attention to bridge the gap between worlds. The days that followed felt quieter, though not empty. The flat settled into its usual rhythm, but I remained deeply aware of the presence behind the wardrobe door. It was no longer a source of fear, but a part of the fabric of my life. The slow, deliberate breathing came less frequently, but when it did, it felt less like a warning and more like a reminder of something unfinished, something waiting. I kept up with my journal, writing down every experience, every sensation. The act of writing felt like a lifeline, a way to tether myself to the reality I knew while also honoring the mystery that unfolded around me. The flat, the breathing, the subtle signs all became a shared story between me and whatever lived behind that door. One day, while cleaning the room, I found a small folded piece of paper tucked behind a loose board in the wardrobe. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The paper was old and yellowed, the ink faded, but still legible. It was a note, written in neat, careful handwriting. The message was simple and haunting. I am here. I wait for peace. The note struck me deeply. It was a plea, a call for understanding. Suddenly, the presence behind the wardrobe felt less like a shadow and more like a person trapped between worlds, longing to be heard and released. I read the note over and over, feeling the weight of its sadness and hope. That night, I sat by the wardrobe door, the note clutched in my hand. I spoke softly, telling the presence that I had found the message and that I wanted to help. The breathing returned, slow and steady, and for the first time I felt it respond to my words. It was a fragile communication, but it was real. I knew I couldn't do this alone, so I reached out to a local medium who specialized in helping restless spirits find peace. She agreed to visit the flat, and together we prepared to face whatever lingered behind the door. We cleaned the room, lit candles, and set up a calm, respectful space. When the medium arrived, she immediately sensed the energy in the flat. She described it as heavy but hopeful, a presence caught between worlds and seeking release. We sat in the room holding hands, as she guided me through a series of rituals meant to open a path for communication and healing. The breathing started again, slower and softer this time, as if the presence was listening and responding. The medium spoke gently, asking the spirit to share its story. I felt a shift in the air, a warmth spreading through the room. Tears filled my eyes as I realized we were breaking through the silence. The medium explained that the spirit had been trapped for decades, bound by fear and pain. It longed to move on, but was held back by unresolved emotions tied to the flat and the life it had left behind. We worked together, offering words of compassion and release, inviting the spirit to find peace beyond the physical world. Over the next few hours, the atmosphere lightened, the air grew warmer, and the heavy tension lifted. The breathing slowed until it finally stopped altogether. For the first time in months, the flat felt still in a way that was comforting rather than unsettling. The wardrobe door remained closed, but it no longer held its cold, oppressive presence. Instead, it stood as a silent guardian of a story that had found its ending. Momo curled up by the door that night, peaceful and content. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes. The air felt warmer, the shadows less dense. I no longer heard the slow breathing, but I sensed a quiet presence watching over the flat in a protective way. The note I found remained on my bedside table, a reminder of the journey from fear to understanding. Living in the flat became easier. The weight of the unknown lifted, replaced by a sense of connection and respect for the lives that had touched this place before me. I carried the story with me, sharing it only with those who would listen with an open heart. The experience taught me about the thin veil between worlds, about the power of compassion and acknowledgement. It showed me that sometimes the unknown is simply a story waiting to be heard, and that peace can come when we choose to listen. And so the cold breath in the closet became not a source of terror, but a reminder of the enduring human spirit, its longing for peace, and the unexpected ways it reaches out across time and space. The nights after the ritual were profoundly different. The flat, once filled with an uneasy chill and the steady rhythm of breathing from the wardrobe, now felt lighter, more peaceful. The presence that had haunted the space seemed to have found its rest. The oppressive cold that had seeped from the wardrobe door was gone, replaced by a warmth that settled gently over the room. Even Momo, who had been so tense and wary, finally relaxed, curling up comfortably in his favorite spot without a hint of fear. I often sat by the wardrobe, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here, from the initial terror of the cold gust and mysterious breaths to the fragile connection forged through words, rituals, and compassion. It felt surreal to think about how much that closet, a simple piece of furniture, had come to mean. It was no longer a doorway to fear, but a symbol of understanding and healing. In the weeks that followed, I kept the note I had found tucked safely in a journal on my bedside table. The words, "I am here, I wait for peace," stayed with me as a poignant reminder of the spirit's longing. I realized that the story of that presence was not one of haunting, but of unfinished business, a soul caught between worlds, yearning to move forward. It was a story about loneliness, pain, and ultimately, release. My relationship with the flat deepened. I learned to listen more closely to the creaks and sighs of the old building, to the soft whispers of memories lingering in its corners. I found comfort in knowing that the flat carried with it the echoes of lives once lived, and that through respect and care, it was possible to honor those echoes rather than fear them. The other tenants noticed the change, too. They commented on the newfound calm in the flat and the absence of the strange noises that had unsettled us all. The flat became a home again, a place where the past and present could coexist without conflict. I found a renewed sense of peace living here, feeling connected not just to the space, but to the unseen stories it held. Sometimes late at night, when the world outside is quiet and the city's distant hum fades, I stand by the wardrobe door and whisper a simple thank you. It feels like a small act of gratitude for the presence that taught me about patience, empathy, and the fragile line between this life and the next. There is a gentle stillness that responds, a quiet comfort that lets me know I am not alone in this. Looking back, I realize the experience changed me in subtle but profound ways. It opened my eyes to the unseen, the unspoken, and the powerful impact of acknowledgement. The cold breath in the closet was not just a phenomenon to be feared, but a call to listen to the forgotten, the lonely, and the lost. It was a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected encounters teach us the deepest lessons. Now, the flat feels truly like home. The wardrobe door is just a door, closed but unthreatening. The shadows that once seemed alive are now just shadows, soft and unassuming. And Momo, once so tense and protective, sleeps peacefully, a quiet companion in this space filled with stories and healing. The presence that lingered is no longer trapped but free, its story complete, its rest earned. And I carry that story forward with me, a testament to the power of compassion and the mysteries that sometimes live quietly just behind closed doors. This is where the story ends, not with fear or mystery, but with peace and understanding. The cold breath in the closet was a chapter in a much larger narrative about connection, healing, and the enduring human spirit. And as long as I live here, I will remember that sometimes the door we fear most leads us to the greatest truths. It started the way a lot of dumb things start, with us driving around with no plan. Back roads, late at night, music too loud to think. There were 4 of us crammed into my old sedan, the heat barely working, windows fogging up every few minutes. We were just bored, restless, and too wired to call it a night. Someone suggested we try to find that stretch of road that locals said led nowhere, the one kids in high school always swore was haunted. I had never seen it myself, and honestly I thought it was just one of those small-town myths that gets passed around because everyone needs something to talk about. But the gas tank was half full, and no one was ready to head home, so we started taking turns at random, just pushing further and further off the main road. The deeper we went, the fewer houses we saw. Streetlights disappeared. Eventually it was just forest pressing in close on either side, branches clawing at the car like they wanted to keep us from turning back. It was past midnight when we saw the barn. At first I thought it was just another collapsing structure, one of those old farm buildings that had not been touched in decades. The roof sagged in the middle, the wood siding looked weather-beaten, and weeds had grown up to the windowsills. But then we noticed the light. A faint orange glow leaked out through the gaps in the boards, flickering like fire. We pulled over without even talking about it. The road was narrow, just wide enough for one car, so we parked half on the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. The air was colder when we stepped out, sharp enough that I felt it sting in my lungs. The woods around us were silent in a way that felt wrong, like the usual background hum of insects and night creatures had just been switched off. One of my friends laughed nervously, said it had to be squatters or maybe kids messing around with candles. But when we got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The glow was not random. The candles were arranged in a pattern, evenly spaced along the inside walls. Through one crack in the wood, I could see them lined up like soldiers, stretching all the way to the far end of the barn. We should have turned back right there. Honestly, everything in me was screaming that this was not ours to see. But the 4 of us were stuck in that stubborn mix of fear and curiosity, the same thing that makes you peek through your fingers during a horror movie. My best friend pushed at the door and it gave way with a low groan, swinging open just enough for us to slip inside. The smell hit me first. Wax, smoke, and something sour underneath like rot. The dirt floor was uneven, pocked with holes, and the candlelight threw long shadows that danced across the walls. That was when we saw the carvings. Every beam, every plank had been marked. Some of the symbols were just shallow scratches, others gouged deep like whoever had made them wanted the marks to last forever. Circles intersecting with lines, jagged shapes that hurt to look at too long, patterns that felt too deliberate to be random but made no sense. Then there were the bones. Small piles of them tucked into corners, some tied together with string, some scattered loose. A rib cage here, a skull there, most of them clearly animal, but a few I did not want to think about too hard. I remember whispering something like, "We should go," but the words came out so soft I do not think anyone heard me. The air felt heavy, like even speaking too loud would draw something's attention. We just stood there, trying to take it in, the silence stretching until it hurt. And then the voices came. At first I thought it was the wind, but the sound grew clearer, rhythmic. A low murmur that rose and fell in waves. It was not English. It was not anything I recognized. Chanting, multiple voices in unison, moving closer. My chest went tight. I could not breathe right, could not get my legs to move. One of my friends grabbed my arm and hissed that we had to hide. The barn had a loft, half collapsed, with a ladder leaning crooked against the wall. We scrambled up, trying not to make the boards creak, pressing ourselves into the shadows as the voices grew louder. I remember lying there on my stomach, splinters digging into my palms, staring down at the open space below. The candlelight flickered against the walls, the carvings seemed to shift in the shadows, and the piles of bones looked fresh in that sick orange glow. The chanting grew steady, deliberate, and then the door creaked open wider. Figures slipped inside, one after another, hooded, cloaked, their faces hidden. There were at least half a dozen of them, maybe more, their voices blending into that same horrible rhythm that seemed to shake the air itself. And they were dragging something with them. I could not see what it was at first. It was long, wrapped in a dark tarp, edges stained with something darker. They laid it down in the center of the barn, right in the middle of the carved floor. I felt my stomach twist. My dog back home would bark at shadows sometimes, and I always thought it was nothing. But in that moment, crouched in a rotting loft above strangers chanting over a body-shaped bundle, I understood what real fear was, the kind that leaves you frozen, praying you are invisible. The figures formed a circle around the tarp. Their voices rose, louder now, echoing in the rafters. One of them stepped forward, holding something sharp that caught the candlelight. My friend beside me whimpered and slapped a hand over her mouth. I dug my nails into the wood, begging silently for her to stay quiet. And then, as if the sound carried, one of the hooded figures paused, their head tilted back, slow, deliberate, until they were staring straight up at the loft. I swear to God we had not moved, not a creak, not a whisper, but that figure's face, hidden in the hood, turned directly toward us. That was when I knew we were not just intruding. We had been expected. The figure never moved at first. They just kept staring up at us like they could see right through the shadows where we were pressed flat. The hood concealed the face, but I swear I felt their eyes lock onto mine. My skin crawled, the back of my neck tingled, and every nerve screamed to bolt, to jump out of that loft and sprint into the trees. But my legs would not move. One of my friends whispered something, just a shaky syllable, and the sound seemed to echo too loud in the barn. The chanting faltered. One by one, the other figures turned their heads upward. It was not like they were surprised or even annoyed. It was worse. They turned with this awful slowness, like they were all following a cue, like they had been waiting for the exact moment to acknowledge us. We flattened down harder against the rotting boards, trying to make ourselves invisible. My heart was hammering so loud I thought it would give us away. My mouth was bone dry, lips stuck to my teeth. I wanted to tell the others not to move, not to breathe, but my voice was gone. The chanting stopped completely. The barn fell into silence, except for the hiss of candle flames and the sound of something dripping from that tarp in the middle of the floor. The smell of iron hit me then, sharp and nauseating, and I realized whatever was wrapped inside was not just an object. The figure who had first looked up took a step backward, then raised an arm. Their sleeve fell back just enough to show skin, pale and thin, etched with the same symbols carved into the walls. They pointed, not just upward at the loft, directly at me. I felt my stomach drop. My whole body buzzed with panic, but still I could not move. It was like the pointing itself held me there, nailed me to the spot. My friend beside me stifled a sob, clutching my arm so tightly I could feel her nails break skin. Then, without a word, the group went back to the bundle. The figure lowered their arm, the others bent down, and the chanting started again, louder this time, vibrating through the floorboards under me. The sound was so low it rattled my ribs, made my teeth ache. We could not watch anymore, we had to get out. I gestured frantically to the others, mouthing that we needed to move while their attention was on whatever was in that tarp. My best friend shook his head, but I did not give him a choice. I started inching backward toward the ladder, careful not to let the old wood creak. Every movement felt like it took an hour. When I finally reached the edge, I glanced down. The ladder was crooked, one rung cracked, but it was our only chance. I slid down as quietly as I could, boots hitting the dirt with barely a sound. The others followed, one by one, pale faces slick with sweat, hands shaking. The barn door was only a few steps away. I swear I could feel the night air leaking through the cracks, cool and sharp. We moved in silence, slow and careful, but halfway there, my dog barked. It was not even a loud bark, more of a sharp yelp, but it cut through the chanting like a gunshot. The voices stopped. Every hooded head turned toward us again. This time there was no pretending. They had us. We bolted. I do not even remember making the decision. My legs just finally obeyed and we ran, the barn door slamming against the wall as we shoved through it. The cold night air hit my face like a slap, and for a second I thought we might actually make it. Then the footsteps started behind us. Not running, not pounding, just a steady rhythm, perfectly in sync, multiple sets all moving together, the sound of deliberate pursuit. The whistling of breath through cloth hoods carried after us, a horrible hiss that seemed too close no matter how fast we ran. Branches tore at my arms, the ground snagged my boots, but I did not stop. None of us did. The car was only a short distance down the road, parked crooked on the shoulder. I could see its dull shine between the trees, and I pushed harder, lungs burning, throat raw. We reached it in what felt like hours but could not have been more than a minute. I fumbled with the keys, nearly dropped them, hands slick with sweat. My friends shoved at me, screaming to hurry. When the locks finally clicked open, we piled inside in a scramble of limbs and curses. I jammed the key into the ignition. For one horrifying second, the engine just sputtered. My heart plummeted, certain this was it. Then it roared to life, headlights flashing against the trees. And that was when we saw them. The hooded figures stood at the tree line, perfectly still. There were more of them now, at least a dozen, maybe more. Faces hidden, robes shifting in the breeze. They did not chase us. They did not lunge. They just stood there, lined up like a wall of shadow, watching. I floored it. Gravel sprayed, the car fishtailed, but we got onto the road and tore away. No one spoke, no one even breathed too loud. The road seemed endless, the headlights catching nothing but the same narrow stretch of asphalt and black forest. When we finally reached the main highway, the tension broke all at once. My friend in the passenger seat was crying openly, chest heaving. Another sat curled against the window, whispering that we should never have stopped, never have gone inside. I kept my hands locked on the wheel, staring dead ahead, because I knew if I looked into the rearview mirror and saw even one of those hoods behind us, I would lose control completely. We drove until the sun started to rise, not stopping until we hit a gas station with lights that felt like salvation. None of us could eat. We just sat in the parking lot, letting the warmth of daylight sink in, trying to convince ourselves it was over. But deep down, I knew it was not. The barn was still there. The symbols, the bones, the hooded figures, they had let us go. That was the part I could not shake. They had seen us. They had pointed at me, and yet we were here, breathing, alive, which meant they had not been finished. The gas station should have felt like safety. Bright fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the hum of refrigerators in the back, the cashier scrolling on his phone like nothing in the world was wrong, normal, ordinary. But even sitting there in the car with the engine cooling, doors locked, and the first stretch of daylight spreading across the sky, I could not shake the feeling that the night was still clinging to us. None of us spoke for a while. My hands were still locked on the steering wheel, even though the car was off. My friend in the passenger seat had her head buried in her hands, rocking slightly. The other two were pressed back against their doors like the extra inches of distance between us might somehow matter. The air in the car felt thick, sour with fear and sweat, and nobody wanted to break it by being the first to speak. Eventually, one of them did. He whispered that we needed to go to the police. At first it sounded like sense, the first real plan we had since bolting out of that barn, but even as he said it, I knew it would not work. How do you tell someone what we saw? A barn full of candles, symbols, bones, chanting figures dragging God knows what in a tarp. They would call us liars, or drunk. Or worse, they would decide to check it out themselves, and those hooded people would not be as patient with outsiders a second time. We went inside the gas station anyway, mostly because none of us could bear to sit in that car any longer. The cashier barely looked up, just mumbled a greeting while we stumbled toward the back cooler for bottled water. I caught our reflections in the glass door, pale faces, wide eyes, and realized we looked exactly like the kind of people who had seen something they should not have. I remember drinking that water like it was the only thing keeping me alive. My throat hurt from running, from choking down panic, but the cold liquid did not settle me the way I thought it would. If anything, it made me more aware of the knot in my stomach, the way my whole body was still braced like something might lunge at us any second. On the way out, I noticed something that made me stop. There was a community bulletin board by the door, the kind where people post flyers for yard sales or missing pets. Right in the center was a piece of paper with one of those same symbols we had seen carved into the barn walls. No explanation, no words, just the jagged design scrawled in black marker. I froze. My friends bumped into me, asked what I was staring at. I could not even form the words to explain. I just tore the paper off the board, crumpled it into my fist, and shoved it into my pocket. The cashier looked up finally, gave me this half smile that did not reach his eyes, and I swear my blood ran cold. We got back into the car and drove in silence. No music, no jokes, not even nervous laughter. Just the sound of the tires humming against the pavement and the occasional sharp breath from one of us trying not to cry. The sky grew brighter, the world around us returning to its usual rhythm, but it felt wrong. Like we had slipped back into normal life, but normal life no longer wanted us. I dropped everyone off one by one. No hugs, no see you laters, not even promises to talk about it later. We just avoided each other's eyes and muttered quick thanks before slipping out into our separate houses. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, it felt like weeks had passed instead of hours. Walking into my house should have been a relief. It was familiar. My dog was waiting at the door, tail wagging, nails clicking against the floor. I let out this shaky laugh as I crouched to pet him, trying to convince myself it was over. Just one horrible night. Just one story we would eventually bury and pretend never happened. But when I stepped into the kitchen, my heart dropped. On the table was a sheet of paper, plain white, like something pulled from a printer, and on it, drawn in the same jagged lines, was another symbol. The exact same one I had ripped down at the gas station bulletin board. I stood there frozen, my dog whining at my side, staring at that paper until my vision blurred. My first thought was that one of my friends had slipped it there as a sick joke, but the house had been locked, my keys had never left my pocket, and none of them had followed me home. I crumpled it, shoved it deep into the trash, but my hands would not stop shaking. I checked every door, every window, every closet, but nothing was disturbed. Still, I could not shake the feeling that I was not alone. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to stretch too long. Around 3 a.m, I woke to my dog growling low at the hallway, ears pricked, fur bristling. I whispered his name, tried to calm him, but he would not look away from the dark stretch of floor outside my bedroom. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it down the hall. Nothing. Just the same framed pictures on the wall, the same clutter by the closet door. But the dog kept growling, low and steady, like he could sense something I could not. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me under again, but it was not restful. My dreams were filled with chanting, with candles flickering against wood, with hooded figures raising their heads to stare directly at me. I woke soaked in sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs. The next morning, there was another piece of paper on the kitchen table. This time, it was not a symbol. It was a drawing. Crude, childlike, but unmistakable. 4 figures standing in a loft, wide eyes staring down at a circle of hooded people below. It was us. That was the moment I realized leaving the barn had not meant leaving it behind. I sat at the table for a long time staring at that drawing. It was crude, shaky lines and uneven proportions, but it was too specific to be random. 4 figures crouched in the loft, watching. The circle of hooded people below. Even the tarp in the middle of the barn had been drawn in, just a rough rectangle with dark lines leaking out from underneath. Whoever had left that paper in my house knew exactly what we had seen. I thought about calling one of my friends, but my phone just sat heavy in my hand. What was I supposed to say? That something had broken into my house and left a picture of us? That the same group we had watched in that barn was now following me home? It sounded insane. And besides, what if I told them and they had not found anything strange in their own homes? Then it would just be me carrying this, me sounding paranoid. So I did nothing. That day dragged by. Every normal task felt pointless, like I was moving through someone else's routine. I made coffee, but it went cold on the counter. I turned on the television, but could not follow what was happening on the screen. The dog shadowed me everywhere, ears twitching, eyes fixed on corners like he was waiting for something to emerge. By evening, I could not take it anymore. I drove over to my best friend's house. The second he opened the door and saw me, he looked like he had been expecting it. His face was pale, his jaw tight, and before I could even ask, he said he had found something too. On his kitchen counter that morning had been a small pile of bones. Tiny, delicate, still flecked with something dark. He swore his house had been locked all night, swore he lived alone. But they had been there waiting for him when he woke. We sat in his living room and compared notes. The flyer I had torn from the gas station, the drawing left on my table, the bones in his house. It was not random, not a prank, not a coincidence. Someone had marked us, and now they were letting us know that we were still being watched. The worst part was we could not figure out how. No broken windows, no forced doors, just things appearing inside our homes as though they had always been there. We tossed around theories until our throats were dry. Maybe the hooded people had followed us back in cars we had not noticed. Maybe there was more than one group, or maybe it was something less human altogether. The possibilities only made the silence heavier. By the time I drove home, I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. My neighborhood looked the same as always. Kids' bikes left in front yards, porch lights glowing warm in the dusk. But as I pulled into my driveway, I saw something that froze me. On my front door, carved deep into the wood, was another symbol. The same jagged lines I had seen scratched into the barn walls. This one was fresh. The edges were splintered, the cuts clean, and tiny curls of wood still clung to the door frame. I backed away, heart pounding, the dog barking wildly from inside. My first thought was to call the police. My second was that it would not matter. What would they do? Take a report, maybe dust for fingerprints, and then leave me alone in that house again. And whoever had carved that symbol would know I had tried to involve outsiders. I went inside anyway because I had no choice. I locked every door, shoved furniture in front of the back entrance, and kept every light on. The house glowed like a beacon, and still I felt like the shadows pressed closer. My dog would not stop pacing. Every few minutes he stopped at the hallway and growled, low and steady. I tried to distract myself by cleaning, by pacing, by scrolling through my phone, but none of it worked. Around midnight, I gave up and sat in the living room with the television on mute, just waiting for something to happen. My eyelids grew heavy, my body exhausted, but the tension kept me from falling all the way asleep. At some point, the static sound of the muted television shifted. I looked up and froze. The screen was no longer blank. It was showing footage of me, not live footage, old, from the barn. I watched myself climb the ladder into the loft, the camera angle set from the ground. I watched the others creep after me, the hooded figures shuffling into the circle below. The video played like someone had been filming us that entire time. My hands shook as I scrambled for the remote, but no matter what button I pressed, the footage kept playing. The chanting started faintly through the speakers even though the volume was still muted. That low, vibrating rhythm that had haunted my dreams since that night. My dog barked furiously, snapping at the television, but the sound only grew louder until it filled the room. I shut off the power at the wall, yanked the cord, and the screen finally went black. The sound cut off instantly. My chest heaved as I dropped the remote, my whole body trembling. I wanted to run, to leave everything behind and never look back, but I knew it would not matter. I had already tried leaving that barn behind, and it had followed me anyway. There was no road far enough, no lock strong enough. They had carved into my door, left drawings on my table, played their voices in my house. They wanted me to know I was trapped. When I finally crawled into bed that night, I left every light blazing. My dog curled tight against me, ears twitching, body stiff. Sleep came in broken stretches, filled with shadows moving at the edges of my vision. And then, at 3 a.m. sharp, I woke to the sound of whispering. It was not outside, not in the hallway. It was in my bedroom. I lay there frozen, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to that low murmur that rose and fell in the same rhythm as the chanting. My throat was too tight to scream. The dog growled once and then went silent, tail tucked between his legs as he pressed closer to me. When I finally forced myself to look, I saw it. A shadow stretched up the wall, impossibly tall, the shape of a hooded figure bending over my bed. I blinked hard, desperate for it to vanish like a trick of the light. But it did not. It just stayed there, watching, waiting. And when I jerked upright, ready to run, the shadow melted into the wall and was gone. But the whispering lingered. The next day I could not face going to work. I called in sick with some half excuse about food poisoning and spent the morning wandering my house like a stranger. Every sound set me on edge. The rustle of leaves outside. Each noise felt. I tried to convince myself that the shadow in my room had been nothing more than exhaustion, some waking dream fueled by stress and fear. But when I opened the trash to throw away the crumpled drawing from the night before, it was not there. The bag was empty. Not just the drawing, but every scrap of garbage I had thrown away. Gone. Like the whole bag had been lifted out in the middle of the night without a sound. I texted my best friend, the only one I trusted enough to tell the full truth to. He did not respond. I called twice, straight to voicemail. By afternoon I was pacing in circles, debating whether to drive over and check on him. Eventually the thought of sitting alone in my house another second was worse than the risk of looking crazy, so I grabbed my keys and left. His car was in the driveway. The blinds were drawn, the porch light still on even though it was midday. I knocked once, then again louder, then finally just turned the knob. The door swung open. Inside was dark, all the curtains pulled tight. The air smelled wrong, like damp earth and burnt wax. My shoes crunched on something as I stepped in, and when I looked down I saw the floor littered with crayon drawings, dozens of them, scattered across the living room. Symbols, rough stick figures, circles with black smears in the center. I called his name, voice cracking, but only silence answered. My stomach twisted. I crouched to pick up one of the drawings and my blood ran cold. It was me, not a stick figure that could be anyone. It was my face, crude but recognizable, and the figure beside me was hooded, looming. I dropped it and bolted down the hall, calling his name again, louder this time. A door creaked open ahead, and for one insane moment, I thought it was him, that he would step out and laugh at me for panicking. But what stepped into the hallway was not him. It was a figure in a dark robe, hood pulled low, face hidden in shadow. It stood there silently, blocking the hall. I stumbled backward, heart slamming against my ribs. My first thought was to run, but another figure stepped into view at the other end of the hallway, and then another, emerging from the kitchen. I was surrounded. The air grew heavy, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. My vision blurred at the edges, black creeping in, and a sound rose in the room, the chanting. Low, guttural, the same rhythm I had heard in the barn. My knees buckled. My body screamed to run, but my legs would not obey. One of the figures lifted a hand and pointed at me, the same way they had in the barn loft. That simple gesture rooted me in place, paralyzed by some force I could not understand. My throat was dry, words stuck there, and all I could do was stand shaking while the sound grew louder and louder until it rattled my bones. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone, just gone. The hallway empty, the kitchen silent, the drawings on the floor the only proof I had not lost my mind entirely. I stumbled out of that house and into the daylight, gasping like I had surfaced from drowning. I drove home in a blur, barely able to keep the car steady on the road. My dog barked when I walked through the door, tail low, body stiff, as though he could smell the fear radiating off me. That night, I could not bring myself to turn the lights off. Every lamp in the house burned, and still the shadows seemed to twitch at the corners of my eyes. I sat on the couch clutching a baseball bat, too tired to move, too scared to sleep. Around midnight my phone buzzed, a new text from an unknown number, just one sentence. "We see you." I nearly dropped the phone. My hands shook as I typed back, demanding to know who it was. No reply, just silence. I threw the phone across the room, but the sound of it hitting the wall did nothing to ease the terror crawling under my skin. I sat there frozen for what felt like hours until the dog started growling at the window. I forced myself to look. Outside, in the yard, stood a line of figures, hooded, still, watching. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again, but they were gone. The yard was empty. The night air was still, but the dog kept growling, pacing, nails clicking against the floor. At that point, I knew this was not about the barn anymore. The barn had just been where we had stumbled into their world. Now their world had bled into mine, and I did not know how to stop it. By dawn I had made a decision. I could not stay in the house another night. I packed a bag, shoved it into the trunk, and drove with no destination. I told myself maybe if I moved far enough, if I left behind everything that tied me to this place, I could slip away from them. But when I stopped for gas 2 towns over, I saw it again. On the pump, scratched deep into the metal, was the same jagged symbol. My knees nearly buckled when I saw it, and I had to grip the pump to steady myself. I realized then that it did not matter how far I drove. They had marked me. Wherever I went, they would be waiting. That night, I stayed at a motel off the highway. The room was dingy. The sheets smelled like mildew, but I did not care. I shoved a chair under the doorknob, kept the television on low, and tried to convince myself I could get even an hour of rest. I dreamed of the barn again, but this time, I was not in the loft. I was in the circle, hood pulled over my head, chanting words I did not understand. And above me, in the loft, I could see someone else crouching, wide-eyed, staring down. When I woke, there was a piece of paper slipped under the motel door. I picked it up with shaking hands. On it was a drawing, the same crude lines, the same rough proportions. This time, it showed me standing outside a motel door, hooded figures surrounding me. I dropped it like it had burned me. I do not think I slept more than 10 minutes at a time that night in the motel. My body would shut down for a few minutes, then snap back awake at the smallest creak, my heart hammering like it expected to see the figures standing over me. The crumpled paper with that drawing of me outside the motel door stayed on the carpet where I had dropped it. I could not bring myself to pick it up again. The air in the room felt stale, suffocating, like the place had been sealed shut for years. I kept the television on a low murmur, some old infomercial selling knives, just so the silence would not swallow me whole. My dog, who had always been my comfort in dark nights, refused to sleep. He sat upright by the door, ears twitching, a low growl rumbling every time the pipes knocked in the walls. I envied his courage. I felt hollowed out, a shell just waiting for something to fill it. By the time daylight broke through the thin curtains, I was already dressed, my bag packed. I drove with no direction again, just pushing miles between me and the places that had already been marked. But there was no outrunning the thought that gnawed at me. It was not the barn they were tied to. It was us. It was me. I stopped at a diner in the next county, forcing myself to eat something, though each bite sat like lead in my stomach. The waitress gave me a smile that should have been comforting, but her eyes lingered too long. When she brought the check, I froze. On the receipt, where the tip line should have been, was another jagged symbol. No words, no numbers, just that crude scrawl. I left cash on the table and walked out without another word. My legs felt like they were carrying me through water. The sun was high. Traffic rolled steady along the highway. People chatted and laughed in the parking lot. But to me it all looked wrong, like I was walking through a stage set. Like at any moment the background would fall away and reveal the circle of hooded figures waiting just behind it. That was when I stopped pretending I could outrun it. I turned the car around and drove back. Not to the barn, I was not stupid enough to walk into their hands again, but back toward the town, back to my own house. My hands were shaking so badly on the steering wheel that I had to pull over twice, but some pull, some inevitability, told me I had to stop running. When I got home, everything was exactly as I had left it. Front door locked, curtains drawn, not a thing out of place. But inside, on my kitchen table, was a single candle, white wax, burned low, a dark puddle congealed around the base. I knew it had not been there before. I had not owned candles like that. I sat down across from it and stared until my eyes blurred. My dog paced in frantic circles, whining, nails scraping the tile. I wanted to run again. Every part of me screamed to leave, but I stayed. For once, I stayed. As the sun went down, I lit it. My hands were trembling so hard I nearly dropped the match. The wick caught instantly, flame burning steady, and I waited. The house fell into a strange silence, like the world outside had folded away. My chest tightened, my throat dry, and then I heard it. The chanting, not outside this time, not on a recording, inside the room with me, low, rhythmic, vibrating against the walls. The flame on the candle flickered, though there was no breeze. Shadows crawled long across the kitchen, bending, twisting, taking shapes that were not natural. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. Instead, I forced myself to whisper, "What do you want from me?" The shadows swelled, stretching tall, hooded outlines rising from the edges of the room. The chanting grew louder. My vision shook, my whole body vibrating with it. And then, clear and separate from the chorus, a single voice answered, "You watched." That was it. Just those two words. Simple, final. And in that moment I understood. It was never about the barn, or the symbols, or the bones. It was about us being in that loft, watching what we should never have seen. We had become part of it simply by being there. Witnesses were not supposed to walk away. I do not remember blowing out the candle. One moment the flame was there, shadows writhing, sound crushing me. The next it was dark, silent, empty. The candle was gone, the table bare. For the first time in weeks I slept through the night. No shadows at the door, no drawings on the table, no chanting in the walls, just silence. The next morning I went to check on my friend, the one I had seen surrounded in his own hallway. His house was empty, the blinds drawn, the floors bare, every trace of him gone. No furniture, no clothes, not even the drawings that had littered the floor, like no one had lived there in years. I asked the neighbors, but they looked at me like I was crazy. One woman swore the house had been vacant for months. Another said she thought it was condemned. My throat went tight, my stomach cold. I had been in that house days ago. I had spoken to him. I had seen him. I drove home, my head swimming, my body heavy. When I pulled into my driveway, my dog barked once, sharp and urgent, then went silent. On the front door, carved into the wood just above the handle, was a new symbol, different from the others. This one looked like an eye. I stood there staring at it for what felt like an eternity. My legs shook, my chest ached, my throat was dry, and then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I finally understood. They did not need to chase me anymore. They did not need to leave drawings or bones or shadows. Because once you have seen them, once you have heard the chanting and watched the hooded circle, you carry it inside you. There is no outrunning that, no hiding, no forgetting. It has been weeks now. Nothing new has appeared in my house. No chanting, no drawings, no shadows creeping at the edge of my vision. To anyone else, it would look like life is back to normal. But every night when I lie in bed, I feel it. The silence is too thick, the air too still. And in that silence, I know they are still watching. Not outside the window, not in the hallway, not crouched in the attic. Inside, and I cannot shake the feeling that the next time I hear that chanting, it will not be outside of me at all. It will be my own voice, joining in. I almost didn't say anything. That's how this kind of thing starts, right? You see something weird, and your brain does that polite little trick where it just files it away and decides not to make a fuss. Probably nothing, it says. You're tired, it says. And to be fair, I was. I work overnights managing a food prep facility just outside Tampa. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. Commercial kitchen stuff, bulk orders. We do pre-chopped veg, pre-cooked meats, that kind of thing. Our place supplies a bunch of small restaurants around the area. Most people only work part-time hours, usually split shifts. And I'm the one keeping the wheels turning at night, making sure everything gets cleaned, labeled, logged. Anyway, it was a Monday morning when I first noticed it. I was doing end-of-week reporting, just double-checking shift logs before they got sent to corporate. We use a pretty basic scheduling system. Names, in-out times, job role. Nothing fancy. I usually skim it fast, just looking for missed punches or anything that might cause an issue with payroll. But this time, something caught my eye. Sunday's overnight shift had a new name listed. Brian. No last name, just Brian. Scheduled from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m., logged in under the cleaner role. He was listed like anyone else, with a valid badge number and everything. Except, and here's the part where I paused, we never hired a Brian. Like, I know that sounds like a dumb oversight, but I've been doing this long enough to know our roster inside out. We're a small crew. We haven't hired anyone in over a month, and I personally processed the onboarding forms. I would have signed off on his background check, set up his badge, added his contact info, but there was nothing. At first, I figured it had to be a clerical error. Someone fat-fingered a name or reused an old badge ID. So I checked the ID number. It pulled up an empty profile. No email, no phone, no assigned login. That's when my stomach started doing that weird, hollow thing. I stared at the screen for maybe a minute longer than I needed to. Then I opened the CCTV archive. Every room in the building has a camera not hidden, just the usual mounted domes in the corners. Mostly we use them for safety or in case something gets reported. I filtered down to Sunday overnight, kitchen footage first. Nothing strange in the early hours. I saw Lisa from the prep crew wrapping up around 11:45 p.m., locking the cold storage. She left through the back door, keyed out as expected. Then, at 3:26 a.m., something changed. A man walked into frame, white uniform, cap, the standard kitchen getup, except I didn't recognize him. Short hair, medium build, could have been anybody, but he didn't do anything. Didn't pick up a mop or start organizing shelves. He just stood there, facing the microwave, for over an hour. I wish I could say he looked agitated or sick or even confused, but no, he was perfectly still, like statue still, not touching anything, not pacing. Just standing there like the microwave had personally wronged him, and he was waiting for it to apologize. At 4:47 a.m., right before the shift would have ended, he moved. He turned toward the camera, slowly, directly, no hesitation. And then he reached up and covered it with his hand. That was the end of the footage. I mean, I can still see the time code running for a bit, but all you get is a palm, then a dark screen. I checked the other cameras, hoping maybe I could catch him leaving or catch a side angle of what he was doing. Nothing. The hallway footage cut out right before 48 a.m. and picked up again just after 5, right as Tim came in for the morning prep. There was no footage of Brian leaving. I closed the laptop and just sat there, listening to the hum of the walk-in fridge. It was 5:30 a.m. by then. The sun was starting to come up. I didn't tell anyone right away. I told myself I needed more info. Maybe it was some system glitch. Maybe someone was doing maintenance and didn't tell me. Or maybe I was being overly paranoid. So I tried to rewind the footage again. I wanted to go back to the beginning, to 3:26 a.m., and watch it more carefully. I clicked back, same camera angle. But this time, nothing. The kitchen was empty. No man, no movement. Just the hum of the appliances and the dim glow of the emergency exit sign. I blinked a few times, rewound again. Still nothing. Same timestamp, same angle, but no Brian. It's not like he faded out or glitched. He was just never there. I tried scrubbing forward to 4:47 a.m. again, hoping I'd see the moment the camera got covered, but it never happened. The footage now just ran straight through, no interruption. No covered lens, no palm. He was gone, like completely erased. I sat back in my chair and felt this weird cold sweat break out across my back. Not panic. Just that moment your body realizes something isn't adding up, and it doesn't know which part to trust. I thought maybe I was misremembering. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. But then I opened the scheduling app again. Brian was still listed. 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. Cleaner shift. And that's when I printed the page. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. I folded it and slid it into my notebook, just in case. By the time the day crew came in, I'd already decided I wouldn't say anything. Not yet. I didn't mention the schedule or the footage to anyone that first day. I had every intention of just letting it go, seriously. I figured if something was really wrong, something obvious, someone else would bring it up. And maybe I was just overthinking everything, right? Lack of sleep, long hours. One too many true crime podcasts in my ears during inventory. But then Tuesday night came. I was back on the late shift again, Just me and the sound of the industrial dishwasher hissing like it was alive. I was doing supply checks in dry storage when Lisa came in early to grab a clipboard she'd left. She's been with us for over 2 years, knows the place better than I do most days. We chatted for a minute, and I don't even know what made me ask. I said, "Hey, you were here Sunday night, right? You see anyone new?" She furrowed her brow like she was trying to remember. Then she said, "Oh, the guy in the white hat." That made my stomach flip. I asked what she meant, casually. She shrugged and said, "Just some guy standing by the back wall when I was locking up. I thought he was new. I waved, but he didn't respond, just kept staring at the microwave." That same line, staring at the microwave. I asked if she told anyone. "No," she said. "Figured he was one of yours. Looked like he belonged. Uniform and all." I nodded and changed the subject. I didn't want to get into it there. After she left, I sat in the break room for a long time, just staring at the schedule again. Brian was still there, still logged for that single shift, still no last name, still no login data, no employee file. And now at least 2 people had seen me on the footage, her in person, and he still didn't officially exist. Around 2 a.m., I decided to pull the footage again, just to double check that I hadn't imagined it disappearing. I logged into the camera archive and jumped to the kitchen view from Sunday night. Same time, 3:26 a.m. Still nothing. No man, no motion, no palm covering the camera. But the timestamp was still running, and I remembered that first time I watched it, remembered it clearly, because I'd paused it and rewound it a dozen times. I even remembered the moment he looked straight at the lens. That tiny shift in posture, the hand rising, gone now, like it never happened. But Lisa saw him, which meant I hadn't imagined it. I didn't sleep after my shift. I just went home and lay in bed with my eyes open, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan and thinking about how many ways this could go. If this was someone sneaking in, then why? If this was some glitch or mix-up, why just one shift? Why just Sunday? And why did he cover the camera? That part felt personal, not hostile exactly, but direct, like he wanted to be seen and then erased. Later that morning, I called our regional HR rep, said I had a name show up on the shift log that didn't match any of our hiring records. She was polite but distracted, probably juggling 5 things at once. She asked for the badge number and said she'd look into it. I didn't mention the video. I wanted to see what she'd find first. She called back 2 hours later. "There's no record of that name or number in the system," she said, "not even archived. Are you sure it was our location?" I told her I was positive, gave her the exact date and time again. "Well," she said after a pause, "sometimes the badge system can autofill if a deactivated number gets reused. Could be a glitch from an old profile." That would have made sense, except I knew we never had a Brian in the past either. I've handled every badge in the last year. I thanked her anyway and hung up. Then I did something stupid. I printed the CCTV stills, not even full screenshots, just some paused frames I had taken from the footage that first time. I had copied them into a draft email, not sent, just saved. And I printed them out on the office printer and took them home. 3 grainy images, one of the man standing by the microwave. One with him turned toward the camera. And the last one, the one that no longer exists, where his hand covers the lens. I taped them to my fridge. My partner was out of town for the week, and I don't know, it felt like something I needed to physically look at, like proof that I wasn't losing it. That night, I slept on the couch. The bedroom felt too far from the front door. The next morning, I noticed something strange. The middle photo, the one where he was staring at the camera, looked different. Not by much, just slightly off. His eyes. I remembered them being slightly downcast, almost neutral. But in the printed version, they were looking directly into the lens. I stared at it for a solid 10 minutes, tried to convince myself I was remembering wrong. Maybe I never paused it at exactly that moment. Maybe the printer just messed up the contrast or whatever. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became. His face had changed. And when I flipped the photo over, there was something written in pencil on the back. Just one word. Again. I did not write that. I live alone right now. No one else has keys to the place. I checked every window, every lock, nothing disturbed, no sign of a break-in. I took the photos down and shoved them in a drawer. I told myself I was being paranoid. I went to work that night like everything was fine. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. And I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else, maybe not new, had been using the building all along. By Wednesday, I started keeping my phone in my hand more than usual. Not because I was scared exactly, but because I felt like I might need to document something again, or call someone, or just prove something to myself. I didn't bring up the altered photo to anyone. I told myself I could have smudged it or stared too long and just convinced myself it was different. But I did check it again, several times. And the pencil on the back, the word again, was still there, still faint, like someone pressed lightly while writing it fast. My handwriting, maybe, but I don't remember writing it. And that's not something I do as a joke to myself. Not with everything else going on. I started double-checking the overnight shift schedule obsessively. No new names, no Brians, just the usual staff, the regulars. A part of me hoped someone else would say something weird. Anything that might mean I wasn't the only one feeling it. But no one did. That Thursday, I ran into Marcus in the loading area. He's one of the delivery guys, only comes in a few times a week for early runs. We made some small talk, and just as he was heading out, he paused and said, "Hey, were you messing with the radios the other night?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" "You know, the headset intercom things. I left one on charge by the cooler, and when I picked it up the next morning, it was broadcasting static, like someone had keyed the mic and just left it open." I asked if he heard anyone speaking. "No," he said, "just this buzzing, like someone breathing near the mic. Didn't sound like interference, though. Sounded deliberate." I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it got knocked loose. "Maybe," he said. Then he added, "It just felt weird, that's all." After he left, I checked the radios. They were all sitting neatly in their chargers, fully powered. I turned one on and listened. Nothing, just silence. Later that night, I did a full walkthrough of the facility. I don't normally do that. I'll check the kitchen, the cooler, the break room, but I rarely bother with the upstairs offices or the old staff locker area, since no one really uses them anymore. But this time I did, just to be sure. Most of the lights up there are motion activated. As I walked past the accounting office, the overhead flickered on, not smoothly though. It stuttered, like it didn't want to stay lit. The hallway smelled faintly of burnt paper, not strong, just enough to notice if you were paying attention. The old locker room was quiet, same scuffed benches, same half-broken mirror, but one of the lockers was ajar. Not wide open, just cracked. I walked over and gave it a gentle pull. Inside was nothing. Just a folded piece of white cloth on the top shelf. I reached up and unfolded it. It was a uniform shirt, our kitchen whites, crisp, clean, no name tag. It looked brand new, like it had been ironed. And inside the folded fabric, something fell out, a small badge card. Just the plastic insert, no clip. It had one word printed in all caps. Brian. No last name, no employee number, just Brian. I didn't touch it. I don't know why. I just stared at it like it might do something if I got too close. Eventually, I put the shirt back, carefully, closed the locker. I didn't take the badge. Back downstairs, I tried to act like nothing had happened. I kept telling myself that someone was playing a joke. Maybe someone found an old blank badge insert and wanted to mess with me after I asked HR about that name. But there was no one who would have known. No one who had access to both the shift logs and the locker room. Not unless they had been watching me very, very closely. Friday, I finally told Claire about it. She doesn't work with me, she used to, years ago, but now she's in retail. We meet up every few weeks, grab lunch, vent about dumb coworkers or rent or whatever. I told her everything, from the shift log to the footage that disappeared, to the man covering the camera, to the shirt in the locker upstairs. She didn't laugh, didn't roll her eyes. She just said, "You need to stop going in there alone. I'm the overnight manager." "I know," she said, "but you don't get paid enough to deal with this kind of thing." We sat there for a while in silence. She took a fry from my plate, stared at it, then said, "You remember those stories from a few years back? The ones about people living in walls?" I gave her a look. "What? Squatters?" "Yeah, kind of. But there was this case where a guy had been living in the attic of a fast food place for months. He would come out at night, steal food, leave notes. No one noticed until a cook caught him on camera, eating cold fries at 4 in the morning. I tried to laugh. "You think Brian's living in our vents?" "I don't know, but something's off. And if you're not imagining it, then someone's using that place like it still belongs to them." I walked home after that, feeling half comforted and half worse. I kept thinking about that badge, about how clean the shirt was, how folded, like someone had prepared it, like they were waiting for their shift to start again. And this time, they wanted to be remembered. I thought about quitting. That sounds dramatic, but it honestly crossed my mind more than once. I'd never had that kind of thought before, not seriously, not even on the worst overnight shifts. But now I was coming into work feeling watched, checking corners like I was waiting for something to jump out. It made everything feel off, even the sounds, even silence. Still, I kept showing up, partly because I didn't want to look weak, mostly because I needed to understand what was happening, and maybe, deep down, I hoped it would all just stop on its own. Like a fever breaking. Saturday night started out quiet, just me, a skeleton crew, and the usual humming of machines in the background. I spent the first hour reorganizing some shipment logs and double-checking the next week's supply orders. Then I walked the main floor like I always do. Everything was clean. No missed labels. No lights left on in storage. But when I passed the break room, something caught my eye. The microwave door was open. No big deal, someone probably forgot to close it, but something about it stopped me in my tracks. I looked inside. A single paper napkin was folded neatly on the glass tray. That's it. Just one white napkin, perfectly square, like it had been pressed flat with care. I reached in, expecting it to be blank. It wasn't. There was something written on it in blue ink. 2 words. Clock in. I held it between my fingers for a long time. I wish I could say I was scared, but it was more confusion than anything. Not confusion like, what does this mean? But confusion like, who left this for me? The only people in the building that night were Marcus, who had clocked out already, and Dana, who was currently on cold storage inventory. I walked to the back and asked her if she'd been in the break room. She shook her head. Not since lunch. I didn't mention the napkin. I just nodded and told her to take her time. Back in the office, I checked the access logs. Every door and badge use in the building gets logged in the system. That's how we track who's where and when. There was a new entry. 11:15 p.m. Badge number, Burn 07. The system listed it as active. There was no such badge in circulation. We don't use letter codes like that. And I checked again, no profile, no name, no metadata, just the time and the tag, break room entry. I took a screenshot of the log and emailed it to myself. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I stayed in the break room. I sat at the small metal table with my arms crossed, watching the microwave like it might do something. The lights buzzed overhead. The vending machine clicked once. Nothing else moved. Midnight came and went. And then I heard footsteps. Not loud, just 1 or 2 slow steps from the hallway outside. They stopped right before the doorway. I stood up and waited. No one came in. I walked over to the door and looked out. The hallway was empty. But one of the lockers down the hall, the same locker where I had found the uniform shirt, was open again. Wide this time. I walked over and looked inside. The shirt was gone. In its place was something new. A pair of kitchen gloves, neatly placed together, fingers interlocked like 2 hands at rest. On the inside of one glove, someone had written a message, same blue ink. Still here. I didn't touch them. I backed away and went back to the break room, shut the door and sat down again. I didn't know what I was waiting for anymore. An explanation? A confrontation? Around 2:30 a.m., the lights in the hallway flickered once. The motion sensor in the corridor pinged. But no one was there. I stood up slowly and walked back to the office. Pulled up the security feeds again. 3 of the cameras were fine, but the hallway cam, the one near the break room, showed only static. I refreshed the feed, same thing. Then I rewound to 2 minutes earlier. And there he was, Brian, standing just outside the break room door, facing away from the camera, not moving. The footage played for 20 seconds, then it cut to static. I hit pause, zoomed in. His uniform looked freshly ironed, the name tag still missing, but I could see something in his right hand. A pair of gloves. I went cold. I tried refreshing the feed again, jumping forward in the timeline. Nothing. When I returned to the hallway 20 minutes later, the locker was shut again. Gloves gone. I called Claire the next morning, told her everything, every detail this time, even the napkin, even the badge log. She was quiet for a while. Then she asked something that stuck with me. "What if this isn't someone pretending to be on shift?" she said. "What if they think they still work there?" I don't get it. What if they were fired, or let go, or just forgot, and now they're showing up like nothing ever changed? That theory hit harder than I expected. Because it didn't feel violent. None of it did. It didn't feel like someone trying to scare me. It felt procedural. Like whoever this was just following a routine they believed still existed. But how do you forget being fired? How do you get deleted from every system? How do you vanish from camera footage? And why now? Why come back? That night, I left the microwave napkin where it was, just in case he needed it. By Sunday, I'd started locking the office door during my shift. It wasn't standard protocol or anything, there's usually no reason to, but I told myself it was just a safety thing. Just in case someone wandered in. Just in case I imagined all of this and needed to feel in control again. I kept telling myself that part, just in case. The napkin was still in the microwave when I got in, folded exactly the same way. I hadn't touched it since I found it. I just checked to see if it had moved. It hadn't. I didn't do my usual walkthrough that night. I stayed mostly in the office, eyes on the monitors. The hallway camera feed was back, but I didn't trust it anymore. Not after what I'd seen disappear. Not after I watched him vanish in real time. Around midnight, the building got that heavy silence again, like everything was holding its breath. That's always the worst part about working overnights, the way normal sounds feel too loud, and the quiet ones feel planned. I got up to refill my water bottle and paused by the break room again. The napkin was gone. Just gone. No crumbs, no paper, no trace. I walked the hallway slow. The lights hummed. I passed the locker area again. The door that had been shut for days now hung open. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Not a napkin this time, printer paper, folded perfectly in half. I looked around before reaching in, took it out and opened it. No words, just a hand-drawn map. It was crude lines and angles drawn quickly, but with clear intent. It showed the layout of our facility. Kitchen, cold storage, break room, loading dock. But there was an X marked in a place that didn't make sense. Behind the dry storage, the back wall, a spot that, as far as I knew, was just a dead end where some cleaning supplies were kept. I checked the badge log again, nothing since the night before, No burn 07 showing up, no recent entries, just silence. I stared at the map for a long time. Then I got a flashlight and went to check. Dry storage is just a long room lined with metal shelving units and stacks of sealed bulk containers. I walked past the usual pallets of flour and bulk onions, then reached the back wall. There wasn't anything marked, no door or hatch, but when I shined the light lower, something caught the beam. A smudge. At the base of the wall, just above the floor, was a patch of slightly cleaner paint, like something had been moved. I pushed on it. Nothing. I crouched and pressed my fingers along the seam, and there it was, a groove, barely visible, a small panel that gave way with pressure. It opened inward, just enough to crawl through. I didn't go in. Not then. I stood there, crouched in that narrow gap, heart pounding like it was trying to warn me off. The air coming through the opening was colder, not frigid like the cooler, but still wrong, still stale. I marked the panel with chalk. We use it for temporary labeling sometimes, and closed it again. I didn't sleep that day. Couldn't. I called Claire and told her about the map, about the wall, about the panel. You didn't go inside? No. She paused. Good. Do you think I should? No. I think you should call someone, but I also know you won't. She was right. Because there was still no crime. No break-in, no real evidence of anything, unless you counted missing footage and disappearing napkins. And I wasn't about to call the police to report a strange drawing and event-sized hole in the wall. Still, something about that space gnawed at me. That night, I brought a second flashlight. I didn't even plan to use it. I told myself I just wanted to confirm the panel was still there. But when I got to it, something had changed. The chalk mark was gone. The panel was open. Not wide, just slightly ajar. I stood there staring at it, not moving, listening. And then, from somewhere deep inside, I heard it. A beep, like a microwave timer going off. Once, then silence, then again. I stepped back slowly, closed the panel, pressed it shut until it clicked again. I went back to the office and sat down, just breathing. I thought about Brian, about how he just stood in front of that microwave, never moving, like he was waiting for something. And now the sound was coming from behind the walls. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just ignore it, but I also wasn't going to crawl in there alone, so I compromised. I set up a small sensor near the panel. Nothing fancy, just a motion detector meant for storage rooms. It was supposed to ping my phone if anything moved nearby. Then I waited. Around 3:10 a.m., it buzzed. I stared at the alert for a solid minute. Motion detected, dry storage west wall. I got up, walked the hallway again, slower than usual. The panel was closed this time, but there were fresh smudges on the wall. Like fingers, grease-streaked, 4 of them near the edge. I checked the floor and saw them there too. Bare footprints. Not full prints, just heel smudges and the balls of feet, like someone with no shoes had been crouching. I followed them a few feet, then lost them near the cleaning cart. Back in the office, I tried to check the hallway camera again. It glitched. Just that one feed. The rest were fine. At exactly 3:26 a.m., the screen froze. Then flickered. Then showed the hallway. Empty. But for a split second, maybe, a frame or two, I saw him. Brian. Facing the wall. Not moving. Not turned toward the camera this time. Just waiting. Like he knew the shift was almost over. I didn't go back in after that night. I finished my shift. I stayed until dawn like I always do, but something in me changed. It wasn't fear exactly. It was like the air in that place wasn't mine anymore. Like I was intruding. Like someone else had claimed it first. I didn't say anything to my boss, not really. Just told her I needed to swap to a day shift if one ever opened up. I blamed it on sleep issues and personal stress, and maybe that wasn't a lie. By the end of that week, I was shadowing the early shift, answering emails, doing supply counts in sunlight instead of under flickering fluorescents, and I kept my mouth shut. But I didn't forget. The panel in dry storage never opened again. I checked once, on my last overnight. It was sealed like nothing had ever moved. I ran my hand along the wall just to be sure, cold and still. The badge number BRN07 never reappeared in the logs. The system updated overnight and wiped out old errors. Or maybe it just gave up trying to catalog something it was never designed to hold. I pulled the motion detector, took it home. It sits in a drawer now, batteries out. I keep telling myself I'll use it someday in a garage or for storage or something normal. I never did figure out what I was supposed to do with the map. Or with the word again. Or with the feeling that Brian had once been real. Not a ghost, not a monster. Just a person who had been forgotten in a place that didn't need him anymore. A few weeks later, I asked around carefully. Not direct questions. More like small talk with the older staff. Anyone remember someone named Brian ever working here? Most of them said no. But one guy, Carlos, paused. He's been around longer than anyone, pushing 10 years now. He squinted, thinking, and then said something that stuck with me. There was a Brian, real quiet guy, worked overnight, didn't last long. I asked why. He shrugged. He just stopped showing up. One night, he was here. Next, gone. We figured he quit. I asked what year that was. He thought about it. Maybe 5 years ago? Could be more. Why? I just said I saw the name on some old logs. Wanted to make sure it wasn't a mistake. He nodded and changed the subject. That night, I went home and looked through my notes. I hadn't kept much. I didn't want a full-on paper trail, but I had the screenshots. I had the napkin with clock in still folded in my kitchen drawer, and I had the gloves, the ones from the locker, sealed in a zip bag, like I thought they might matter someday. I kept thinking about how everything he did felt like a routine. How he showed up, stood in the right place, followed the schedule. How he covered the camera like he was clocking out. What if that was all it was? What if this wasn't about haunting or revenge or scaring anyone? What if he just didn't realize he was done? That thought hit me harder than anything else. Because I've known people like that. People who stayed too long in places that stopped seeing them. People who kept showing up because it was all they knew. I kept going over that final glimpse from the hallway cam. The way Brian stood facing the wall, still and calm, like he was waiting for a door to open, or like he was ready to leave but didn't know how. And the beep, the one I heard from the panel, I started to wonder if that was his last signal, his sign out, the end of the shift. Claire asked me once, "What do you think he wanted?" I told her the truth. I think he wanted someone to notice. After that, I let it go. I stopped checking the cameras. I deleted the badge screenshots. I threw away the gloves, not out of fear, out of respect maybe, or closure. I'm not sure. The only thing I kept was the napkin. I don't know why. Some nights, when I get home late and the house is dark, I look at it, that little blue message. Clock in. It doesn't feel scary anymore, just quiet, just like a reminder. Of what? Maybe of all the invisible work people do, all the places they go without being seen, all the ways we fade from systems and schedules and still leave footprints behind. I still work there, by the way. Days only. The overnight role stayed vacant for a while. No one filled it. And then last week, I heard someone ask about it again. Some new manager wondering if we should repost the listing, reopen the shift. I didn't say anything, just looked out at the hallway. And for a second, I thought I saw something move past the break room door. But it was just a reflection. Or maybe not. I don't know what Brian was. A man who got overlooked. A memory replaying. A routine still echoing through the walls. But I do know one thing. That shift was his. And now it's over.